Okay, so good. This is what we have talked about before and what I wanted to share with you. So basically, thinking about public relations, there are two types and three basically situations. So you have internal PR, which is about talking among ourselves. How do we create interest and energy among members of the congregation and communicate with ourselves? And then there's external PR, which is about talking to people outside of our community about our community. So the three varieties or situations that you might have, the first one is what I call invitational, which is that you're saying, here's an activity that you might enjoy, here's something that you're invited to. So internal invitational is like with the annual meeting, let's say. We want to get our members to come to an activity that we're offering them. That would be an internal invitational piece of PR. An external invitational would be like you're saying to your coworker who's expressed interest in what the congregation is doing with hunger outreach to come to a service or to come to a forum or to come with you to distribute sandwiches, anything like that, where you're saying you are not a member of the community, but come and be part of an activity that we're doing. There's also what I think of as reputational PR, which is about helping people feel confident about what the congregation, the community is telling them. So internally, that's about transparency and trust. You know, it's like posting the board minutes so that anybody can go and see them whenever they feel like, making people feel confident that they have access to the information that they want, that they're getting the full story. External reputational is about building credibility in the larger community. So that's the reputation that the congregation has. You know, when the person from another community that you're meeting at a protest or wherever says, oh, yes, I know All Souls, those are the people that show up. That's reputational PR. That's the kind of awareness of who we are that's out there in the community and that we'd like to create and have it be positive. And then finally, there is confrontational PR, which is about things that may be difficult or uncomfortable or challenging. So internal confrontational PR is often around leading change. Let's say we're going to change the hour of the Sunday morning service. You know, that we have to be prepared to do confrontational PR about that people are going to have feelings. We need to help those feelings get expressed. We need to be forthcoming about our reasons. We need to help people deal with the message that we're giving them. External confrontational PR is about what's called committing news, which is when something happens within or to the congregation, or the congregation does something that a reporter is going to be interested in, that the local news is going to want to hear about. So, and it may or may not be something that we do. For instance, when our Black Lives Matter sign was stolen, that was committing news. We didn't have any choice about the fact that the reporter was there, found out about it, there was a story on TV. What we wanted to do was control that story so that it came across the way we wanted it to come across. It's also when, you know, you're in the middle of the Oregon wildfires and the church building burns down. You have committed news at that point, and people are going to be inquiring about the facts. It can also be something more voluntary that we did, like if we say, okay, we're sending our kids to Guatemala to, you know, work building a school or something like that. We're still committing news. We're doing something that people are going to want to know more about. So when we are, each of these has a number, and then these further notes have to do with that number. And so the first one is about encouraging member attendance. That's invitational internal. So there are some things we can do to help that. And this is going to be, you know, we're going to have to be creative about some of these things now, because we're not doing the same system that we had before. But the video slide announcements, that's something that we need to think about, how we might reinstitute that as part of the Sunday morning process. But when you do that, you only get a very short text. So if you want to publicize, let's say, the garden tour, you know, you get about 10 or 12 words at the most on a slide like that. You have to be very, very succinct. But you can also have an image, so that's helpful. It can be a picture. We used to do Sunday bulletin announcements. At this point, that's more of a Flickr thing. In the newsletter, in the Flame, the monthly issue, you can be more long-winded in the Flame. You can explain more about what the event is. There are still about 40 people in the congregation that get printed copies of the Flame in the mail. Also, when the building is open, visitors take the paper copies. So that's why we still do paper copies. But most people get it online, and then they can click on a link online, and that means that you can say as much as you want in that particular context. Now, the Friday Flickr, you can still link with a click-through to the website, but you can only put in maybe 3 or 4 sentences at the most in the Flickr itself, and then everything else that you want to tell people has to go in the link that you click to. It should be mentioned here that we have had a policy that we don't just send random emails to the whole congregation. The only time that we send out an email other than the Flickr is if there has been a death in the congregation and the memorial service has been scheduled before there will be another meeting of the congregation on Sunday morning. So if somebody dies on Monday and their family wants to do the memorial service that Friday, then we will send out an email so that everybody knows. But other than that, we try very, very hard not to exhaust people's patience with getting emails from the congregation, because otherwise what will happen is they'll stop reading them, and that defeats the purpose. The teams and committees should be conscious of what they are presenting internally to the other members of the congregation through their web pages. So if you're on, let's say, the worship team, and you notice something on the web page about worship services that is outdated or inaccurate, or you think doesn't reflect well on us, definitely notify the office, and then Leandra and I, and potentially Andrea or other members of the social media committee can take a look at it and see if what can be done about it. We have 2 aspects of presence on Facebook. Some of this may be already known to you, but there's always someone who isn't clear about this. So we have a public page on Facebook that anybody who Googles us can be brought to. And that is extra. We think of that as being external invitational. It is directed to the larger community. And therefore, the only things that should go on that are things that have been approved by the office or by the social media team. The private group on Facebook, you can only access if you have been approved. And Andrea, is that still you or SMEC, or who does that approval at this point?
It's generally me, but there's like 5 of us that can approve.
Okay, so someone has to say, hey, I'd like to be part of that private group. And once that we've said okay, Generally, it's members only, but there are some other people like Laura McDonald from More Squared and some folks like that who do have access. Anybody who's approved to be part of that private group can post on that private group. Now it is moderated, and if you put up something really bizarre or inappropriate, it will be taken down. For instance, if you would post an ad for a political candidate, you can't do that even on our private group, and we will take that down as soon as we notice it. Or if you were, saying that Roma Lee is not a nice person or whatever, if it was a really inappropriate kind of statement, we would take those down too, or anything that was hurtful to our members.
And the rules are posted in there that would guide you. Not, it does say no bullying and be nice, but it specifically lays out the political things that are and are not accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Kendall, are you picking a Roma Lee?
Am I? No, I was picking out the person that I thought was least likely to ever have anyone say something like that about her.
Hey, what are you saying about me?
I can think of several people that might say something like that.
Might be. Hopefully they're not in our private Facebook group. That's all I have to say about that. When we were meeting in person, we did have a policy that we did not put a lot of stuffers in the order of service. So we encouraged people, if they wanted to pass out a handout, they could do that personally, or they could leave them on tables in the foyer. But they cannot stuff things in the order of service, because then they fall all over and I think take away from the worship experience. People also had the option of doing tabling in the foyer. They could do creative, crazy things like wear t-shirts or funny hats or walk around in sandwich boards. It was also permissible to put up posters in the foyer, but we try not to tape announcements in the windows, because our windows are part of the aesthetic of the church and not our bulletin boards. And then we did have bulletin boards that you could put stuff up with the approval of the contact person. So like there was a social justice bulletin board and a religious education bulletin board, and you really needed to get the people who were in charge of those to approve. So those were just some techniques for each of us and for helping other people to make their events and their activities accessible to the community. A lot of that is now dependent on the Facebook and on the website and on the electronic, the Flickr and the Flame, the distribution mediums.
And Kendall, just a quick update. The deadlines for the Flame and the Flickr have changed.
Right.
The Flame deadline is the 20th of the month, and the Flickr deadline is Wednesday morning.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it's something that can be done by Wednesday morning, yes. For instance, when we have things that happen at the board meeting that need to go in the Flickr, we can in fact get those things in on Thursday morning. But if you know on Monday that you're going to be doing an announcement, it is courteous to get it to Sherry by Wednesday. Yeah. So it's partly a question of urgency, but so those are all the ways of doing internal invitational PR. So can we shift down to the next category, which is about external PR? And one of the most powerful tools we have for that is still the website. Very few people ever come to visit either the building itself or our online services without having looked at the website first. So always think about that's our front door. That's our first impression that people are going to get. And then based on that, they follow up with whatever else they might want to be involved in. So they also look at the live stream services and the recorded services. So this is part of why we think it's important to use YouTube and leave our services up on YouTube so that people can go and check them out, even if it doesn't happen to be Sunday morning when they find out that they're interested in learning more about us. Obviously, our Facebook public page tells a lot and is sometimes more up to date than the web page. The web page is intended to be static information that doesn't change all that much. The Facebook page is for things that are going to come and go quickly. So if it's a particular event that we're inviting people to a concert, let's say, there's nothing wrong with putting it on the web page other than that you need to take it down again when it's done. But you can put it on the Facebook page and it'll just drop to the bottom and you don't have to worry about going and making it go away again. Another thing to be aware of about the Flickr is that the Flickr is designed so that it can easily be forwarded to someone that you think might be interested. So keep that in mind for your own purposes and for other people as well. You know, forward this to your friend who's interested in the work of our racial justice team or whatever. And therefore, keep in mind that what you put in the Flickr will be an outward directed piece of PR. It's not just for our internal communications. We also, once upon a time, did posters that people like distributed to coffee shops and stuff like that. Music Sunday was a good example. They usually had a poster design that went out to the university and other places like that. We do not want people going around just putting up random posters in public about church activities. We'd like you to check those either with me or with the social media team. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? That's all about inviting people to stuff, which is a lot of what we do in terms of PR. The others are a little less frequent, shall we say. And then we have reputational PR inside the congregation. So this includes getting information out so that members and friends and people who are participating feel like they have been told. Now, you know, it's always a gamble whether an individual person is going to feel like they were notified enough about something. But these are the things you can do to try to help that happen. Obviously, the flame is a good place to talk about board decisions or discussions that the board is having, conversations about, oops, all right. Let's see if I can go a little more quickly here. So we, the board, can put stuff, information in the flame. We can also post things on the website, and that is a good place for enduring documentation like our minutes and other documents that we might want people to refer to, the policy statements, budgets, things like that. So you want to be able to say, oh yes, that's available on the website. Anytime somebody says, well, can I see the budget? Can I see the minutes of the board discussion or whatever? Another technique that we did use has been church chats, when we invited people to stay after the service and talk about and learn about a particular subject that was going on at church. Now, there's nothing to actually stop us from doing that on Zoom. That wouldn't be hard. So that's something that we could maybe think about.
I think we've done one, haven't we? I can't remember what it was. Chuck did something.
Oh, okay, right.
I can't remember what it was, if it was Justice Action or if it was something else. But
Yeah, it was Justice Action.
That's right. Okay, good. So we can still do that, and that's an option we should consider. We have our board meetings are open. Most other committee meetings are open, not the nominating committee and not the committee on ministry. Those are the two that I think of right away that are not, you can't just as a visitor drop in on them. But most of our meetings are open, and that is because there is a certain kind of reputational PR in people just watching how our leaders behave and how our committees operate through their covenants. That is a a demonstration and a witness of who we are. Obviously, go ahead.
I would add that the caring committee is also not one that people can visit.
Right. For obvious reasons of confidentiality, right? The only reason we have meetings that aren't open is because we're discussing named individuals in ways that we don't feel should be out public, but
Kendall, could I interrupt for a moment?
sure, yeah, go ahead.
Something keeps coming up on my screen that someone's trying to get into my Zoom.
Uh-oh.
And then my internet is going away and I'm having to reconnect.
Oh.
So if I can't keep on, can I call Russell and talk to you by phone?
Yeah, we can work it out.
Okay.
Yep. And in the email I sent,
If I lose my connection, but something strange is going on.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
and-
weird.
Judith, in the email that I send out at the bottom are the phone numbers you can call to join Zoom on your phone.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Oh no, it's important
know
to
what
know that.
happened if I disappear.
Right, right. Obviously, the annual congregational meetings, annual reports, those are also reputational internal vehicles for helping people feel like they have all the information, that nothing is being hidden or covered up. One of the things that the board specifically does is the mission-based conversations, and that is a way of making sure that there is communication going on and that the teams understand that the board is there to help them and try to address their concerns. We've also from every once in a while done dialogue circles, which is a way of making sure that people feel like they are heard, that their ideas can be put out there and that they can get whatever information that they're looking for. So it all goes to credibility, as does the external reputational PR. So why don't we move down to that one real quickly, Russ? Thank you. So this is about building both awareness and credibility in the community. So we want people to know that we exist and also to feel that that's a good thing. Both of those go into external reputational PR. So that includes the signage, including the banners on the building and the information signs about what we're doing and when the building's open, and all of those kinds of things help create an impression of being welcoming or not, or who's invited and who's not. So does the appearance of the building from the outside. If the parking lot is full of trash and the grass is not mowed and things look unkempt, that is a message that we're sending to the larger community. Also, the use of the building by our allies, by speakers that we want to support. I mean, our building itself is a kind of PR tool. And that includes having known activists and city officials, the kinds of people who present stuff to us. It also includes things that our members wear that identify themselves. There's a kind of fairly widespread awareness of the bright yellow t-shirts that the Standing on the Side of Love group used to hand out to everybody. And you know, people knew even outside of Unitarian Universalism, the yellow shirts, the yellow love shirts were kind of a known commodity. So sometimes we wear jewelry or, you know, buttons or whatever to say, I'm a Unitarian Universalist and this is what we think about XYZ. So when you're out and about in public and you're identifying yourself as a member of this congregation, you are performing public relations on our behalf, right? Sometimes we write letters to the editor as a board, as the minister, as the social justice team, whatever, those kinds of public statements, or we sign sometimes, like the Interfaith Council will do a joint statement and we sign on to that. That's another form of reputational PR in the larger community. when our members and our leaders, whether that's me or the president of the board or our intern or our teens or whoever, when we participate in protests or marches or vigils, those kinds of specific events, or when we are members in local progressive organizations, and when we participate in interfaith activities like the Table of Faiths or the Interfaith Thanksgiving Dinner, all of those things present us to the larger community, hopefully in a positive way. Also, when we participate in community service activities, so the Free Hot Soup and Casey Heroes, that's PR that we're doing. The Warming Center, that's PR that we're doing. All of that creates awareness and reputation in the community. When we do commit news, when we have interviews and stories about things that All Souls is doing, whether that's on the newspaper, the TV, the radio, all of that also creates awareness. And if we do it right, it creates positive awareness. When we put out public invitations to All Souls events, I'm thinking of things like the Tullamore concert, for instance, that Judith does. That says something about who we are and how welcoming we are and our support for the arts and a lot of things. That makes a statement about us. So when we do civic participation in like our neighborhood associations, if we are poll workers or do these kinds of things and say, you know, this is part of my commitment to my faith. That is also a piece of PR for us. When we speak with people who call us on the phone, or when we call people on the phone, when someone wanders onto the property, or we deal with someone who is selling us equipment or dealing with our copier lease or whatever, the ways that we talk to those people, the ways that we treat them, all of that is also PR that we are doing on behalf of the congregation. And if we are, you know, rude, or if we are untrusting, or if whatever, that reflects on all of us as a community. This is important in part because of the principle that even people who are very happy as Methodists or Jews or Catholics or whatever they are never going to become members of our church themselves. They may still have sisters-in-law or hairdressers or whoever, the people they know, that they might say, oh, you know what, you sound like one of those Unitarians. And if that's a good thing, they may send those people to us. So we want good reputational external PR, not only directly, but also indirectly, so that
Sound
people
like
are
one of them crazy Unitarians.
Yes, exactly. And that, you know, that's fine as long as it, people don't say, oh, that place is awful. You know, I've been there and they were rude, or I've been there and it was, you know, knee deep in weeds or whatever. You know, as long as it doesn't come with a bad impression, then you sound like one of those Unitarians is something we want people to be saying to each other. So it's worth thinking about, what do we want people to be saying about us? You know, if someone says to you, All Souls, oh yeah, that's the place that blah, blah, blah. What do you want the end of that line to be? You know, what is it that you would like people to be saying that that's who those folks are? And that's what we want to do as we build that external reputation of the church. All right, real quickly, let's look at the next ones. So confrontational PR is about dealing with certain kinds of discomforts. So internally, that's often about leading through the stresses of change. Whether the change is something we're choosing to do or something we don't have any choice about, like being online because of coronavirus. So we always want to be aware that we are engaging in public relations when we model behavior to the rest of the congregation. So when we show respect and care and non-anxious presence, and that we're being thoughtful in our process, all of that is itself a message. Quite apart from the content or information that we're putting out there, it's how do we handle people and ourselves? How do we communicate? That in itself is a form of PR. We talk in the board covenant, we talk about the board being all on the same page about respecting our decisions and not undercutting the board. That too is a form of PR, you know, that to help people feel like they can trust the board, that the board has some clarity and some coherence in its process. And we are open, you know, people can see the work that we're doing. They can visit the board meetings if they want. They can see our minutes. All of that helps lessen the anxiety and the stress that goes with any kind of controversy or change. We ask members of the board and members of the congregation both to avoid gossip, to avoid creating dysfunctional triangles where people talk about each other rather than to each other, to avoid bullying, to avoid arguments that are about how you're a nasty person rather than how there's another way of looking at the issue. And all of those are forms of PR too, because we would like to be the kind of community that helps people grow beyond those communication strategies. So the persistent use of all those communication strategies about transparency and credibility, creating an ample opportunity for all views to be heard, even if you feel like you've heard it all before, even if you feel like people have had opportunities, the more you can make that people feel like they have the opportunity to say something, then even if they don't want to, they know they've had the opportunity. That is a form of PR, and it makes them more comfortable with something that maybe they weren't as happy about. And then finally, in terms of internal confrontational, recognizing and honoring loss, that it's not change in itself that people fear, it's the thing they're going to lose through that change. So acknowledging that there is loss for someone while also helping them focus on what might be the potential gain for the community through this, but mostly acknowledging that there's loss involved is helpful. Okay, the last thing, and this is sort of just a quick how-to. Committing news can be, as we said before, a natural disaster. It can be an institutional scandal, or it can be us deliberately taking a position of witness, like putting up the Black Lives Matter banner, for instance. If you know that that has happened or is going to happen, it's important to have a designated spokesperson and to refer requests for comment to that person. It's really not helpful to have a lot of members of the board or a lot of members of the congregation running around giving their own interpretation of things. It's much more helpful if we refer people to either me or the president of the board, and then I can be in contact with whoever that person is, and we can be sure that we're on the same page. So Andrea and I, you know, so if I'm the person who has committed the news, let's say by running off with the music director, then obviously it would be Andrea. For most other purposes, start with me. Although, for instance, if it's an issue around children, then it might be Judith who would be that spokesperson. If we, you know, had a terrible death of a family in a car crash, and the question is, well, how are you dealing with that with your kids? Then it would be natural to turn to that person. And if it was a question about music, for instance, it might be Anthony, or specifically membership. There are situations in which we would turn to expertise within the congregation, but in general, start with Andrea or me. Now, if you do through some turn of fate, become a spokesperson, here are the ways to control the message. And this is what you want to do. You want to decide on what is the one sentence that is your main message. For instance, when Third Presbyterian or whatever the church was that its building burned down a few years ago, which was it?
Westport Presbyterian is.
Westport, thank you, Westport, right. They were very clear. They had a message that they repeated all the time that the building has burned, but the church is open. You know, and that, so every time someone had a question about, well, what are you going to do, or how did this happen, or whatever, they were clear that that was the message that they wanted to get across. And so whatever else they were saying, they knew that that was their main message. It helps if you write that down so you don't forget what was my main message. And every time you come back to it, you can say, as you know, the building burned, but the church is still open, and keep people focused on that. Then if you have time, select 4 or 5 supporting statements and write those down. And then all the questions that people ask you, answer them with the statement that you choose to make. Don't necessarily buy into the way that the person who is interacting with you chooses to frame it. Choose your own frame. Keep your answers in positive terms. For instance, you don't want to say, well, we don't believe that Kendall was guilty of fraud. That just engraves that phrase, Kendall was guilty of fraud, in the public mind, right? You want to always put it in positive terms. So, you know, we have complete faith in our minister's integrity, right, is a better way of putting that, and keeps you out of the risk of being misquoted. And by the same token, never repeat a negatively stated question. If somebody said, didn't you help create a riot by attending that protest? Don't say, no, we don't think we helped create a riot. No, don't accept the frame. Say, we attended the protest in order to support, you know, our neighbors of color. You know, that, reframe it in a way that makes a positive statement that you want to make. You can always ignore the premise of a question, but be cautious about getting into an argument about it. So if someone says, well, you know, all of this violence is really bad for the country, how come you are supporting it, let's say. The best thing to do is just don't get into whether or not it's violence and whether or not it's good for the country and whether or not we're supporting it. There is that's a no-win frame for that question. So just take it and say, you know, we believe in reconstructing a society that will be just and fair for everybody, right? That's your taking of the statement and reframing it in the way that you want to do. Anytime you're talking to a reporter, you can always take a moment to think about how you want to answer. They're not going to play a recording of a bunch of empty airspace, and they're not going to put a big empty patch in the newspaper. So once you've decided what you want to say, then you can say it, and nobody else is going to hear that you took a moment to compose your thought. And then another thing you can do, if you have to be the spokesperson, is you can always prepare some written information, a press release or a statement, so that people get the information that you want them to have, and you don't have to rely on them to get the relevant facts. You're giving them the relevant facts and telling them what you want them to know. So questions about that? I think that's the whole thing. Is that right, Russ?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm always, if you find yourself in a position where you're going to need to review some of this, I'm always happy to talk with people about it and, you know, particular technique or whatever. Is that helpful? I know we're a little behind